You're watching a production of South Dakota Public Broadcasting. East River, West River. South Dakotans seem to always be talking about East River and West River, and visitors sometimes have no idea where those places are. The names have to do with the Missouri River, the great water that runs through the middle of our state. Everything east of the Missouri is East River. The other side is West River. The reason South Dakotans talk so much about the two parts of their state is that life, in many ways, is different from one half to the other. East River feels like the Midwestern part of the United States. Corn and soybean fields, towns fairly close together, plenty of rain most years. East River people, if they want to visit a big out-of-state city, might choose Minneapolis. Each fall, they're most likely to be Vikings football fans. In the West, Denver is the big city people like to visit, and the Broncos are the most popular football team. Of course, none of this holds true all of the time. There are some ranches East River and some farms West River. There are years when it rains too much West River and not enough East River. You can even find Vikings fans in Rapid City and Broncos fans in Sioux Falls. But the expected differences between Midwest and West hold up much of the time, right down to the way folks dress. South Dakota isn't alone in being a state split this way. In Minnesota, people talk about the metro area, where millions of people live in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. The rest of Minnesota they call outstate. Both Nebraska and North Dakota are split east and west, just like our state. How did South Dakota get divided between East River and West River? Well, it all started with something we talked about earlier: rain. American Indians who crossed the plains knew they found less rain and snow the farther west they traveled. European explorers and fur trappers noticed the same thing in the 1700s and 1800s. European people measured the world east to west with imaginary lines on their maps and globes called meridians. The 100th meridian runs right through the middle of South Dakota. The 100th meridian, people in the 1800s believed, was especially important. East of the 100th, there was usually plenty of rain, and farms would likely develop and succeed along with towns. But old-timers called the country on the other side of the 100th meridian west of 20 inches, meaning west of where it rained at least 20 inches of water most years. Without that much rain, people believed, lots of farms would fail or never get started in the first place. Some people call the region the Great American Desert. Lonely, dangerous, and likely to stay that way. But even where the rains came regularly, life was a challenge. Settlers who came to eastern South Dakota in the 1860s and 1870s worked harder on their farms than most of us can imagine today. Every spring, with horses and mules, they plowed and dragged their fields so the soil would be as powdery as possible for planting. They planted crops: wheat, corn, soybeans, barley, and oats. All summer long they protected their crops by pulling weeds that could destroy their plants. All the time they knew there was no protection from other crop killers, like hail, or grasshoppers and beetles. At the same time, during the hottest part of the year, farm families were cutting, tying, and storing the hay in hay logs. The animals that ate the most eastern South Dakota hay were dairy cows, which farmers milked twice a day, every day of the year. Farms almost always had chickens, and lots of them raised pigs. The first farm work most kids did was feeding animals and giving them water. In the fall, when crops were done growing, everyone helped with harvesting, gathering the corn, beans, and grain. Tasks were never finished, and, said one farmer, the way members of these families showed they loved one another was by their hard work. When unusually big jobs or illness kept a farmer from getting everything done, neighbors helped. Of course, when it was time to sell their crops, milk, animals, and other products, farmers believed they should get most of the money. Sometimes, though, it seemed like railroads that hauled the products and other companies farmers did business with took most of the money. So in 1890, farmers got together at Huron and started an organization that became known as the Populist Party. It was a political party like Democrats and Republicans. Populists fought for fair railroad prices and for good farm prices controlled by the government. Hard work, neighbors helping neighbors, getting involved in politics so that things would be fair for even the smallest farm business, all this made South Dakotans proud to be farmers. The United States government looked at the farmers' success and decided the best thing that could happen to the American Indian people was to become full-time farmers. It was something new to these people whose ancestors had fed themselves by a small amount of farming and gathering, and mostly by being fine hunters, especially bison hunters. But almost all the bison had been killed. There was little choice but to try farming. Those living on the Sisseton Reservation in East River had some success with crops. But people living on West River reservations, beyond 20 inches of rain, had trouble. Not only were they expected to learn everything about farming immediately, but they were to grow crops without enough water. It was impossible. About the same time, another people far to the south in Texas found something that grew well West River: cattle. Not dairy cows for milk, but cattle for beef. Texas cattlemen learned they got better beef if they herded their animals hundreds of miles north to a land they called Dakota, to grasslands that once fed bison. Moving the cattle north were some of the most famous characters in American history: cowboys. At first, cattlemen thought West River got so little snow that animals could eat grass year-round. Then came harsh winters of 1886, 1887, and especially 1888. Grass was buried under heavy snow, thousands and thousands of cattle died, and lots of cattlemen returned to Texas to stay. Those who remained started ranches where they cut hay, just like East River farmers, so they could feed their animals through snowy winters. The first ranches had no fences. Ranchers burned marks, called brands, into their cattle. Each rancher's brand was different, so they'd know who owned each animal when the cattle got mixed together on the big, unfenced prairie. Cattlemen liked the idea of using the whole West River grassland, and they opposed anyone who wanted fences, especially folks who wanted to move in and raise sheep, which required fencing. But fences went up anyway, some built by cattlemen themselves because they learned there was good money in raising sheep. Some years sheep made more money, and some years cattle did. It was smart to have both. In the early 1900s, ranchers looked on in disbelief when the United States government started opening up West River land for farmers. Not enough rain, the cattlemen said. But the government predicted rain would follow the plow. meaning if enough crops were planted, the plant life would put moisture into the air and create regular rainfall. If it worked, if rain followed the plow, West River would soon look just like East River. But it didn't happen. Most West River farms dried up, failed, and were bought by ranchers for cattle and sheep. West River farms that succeeded were mostly along rivers and creeks, or in areas where dams were built to supply water for crops, or wells dug to bring water up from aquifers.
He had about a 9th place finish.
Just like
yesterday,
farming,
so this young
ranching
man
became a
got
proud
knocked off his
tradition
first horse,
with
so
its own
I'm
customs and
confident in this
celebrations.
kid, Jimmy.
And while ranches and farms are different in lots of ways, they combine to create the #1 moneymaker ever for South Dakota: agriculture. Agriculture means growing plants or animals to sell as food or as other products like wool. For more than 100 years, the state's agricultural products have been sold around the world. Both farms and ranches changed in the 1900s because of machines, beginning with tractors more powerful than horses and mules. Machines were developed for cutting hay, killing weeds, and harvesting crops. The machines made farm work easier in some ways, but also made it necessary for farmers and ranchers to be good mechanics, able to keep the machines running. The machines made it possible to farm or ranch bigger and bigger pieces of land, sometimes creating more work, not less. And because machines could do the work of many men and women, agriculture grew lonelier and lonelier. Starting in the 1960s, lots of farmers and ranchers and their families moved to town as big farms and ranches bought out smaller ones. The fields were still full of crops and animals, but some country houses and barns, once full of life and work, stood empty. In the 1980s, prices for farm and ranch products were low. At the same time, banks were charging lots of money for borrowing money. And some farmers and ranchers had borrowed lots of money to pay for the latest equipment. All this added up to a sad situation where even more families, both East River and West River, had to give up on agriculture. But while agriculture has changed, it remains South Dakota's #1 business. It's likely to remain so for years to come. And for those of us who live here, it's what makes East River feel like East River. And West River like West River.
For additional information, a teacher's guide, games, quizzes, and more, log on to dakotapathways.org.